Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Boynton. I'm the Dean of the Carroll School of Management, and welcome to BC and our great finance conference today. I'm going to be brief. I'm between you and a terrific speaker who will be introduced in a few minutes, my classmate and alum, Nick Burns. I think this is the 13th annual finance conference, 13, and they've just been terrific. We're going to have a great day of learning. We're all in today, conversations, learn from our guests, learn from each other. The Carroll School, as a business school, is on a roll. Many of you get our newsletters. I think it's the top undergraduate business school in the country. I think it's the top faculty in the country. That's why it's such a great school. Many of them are here today. We're also in the building for the Boston College football team, which is going to have a great year, all right? So we're on a roll. Everything is looking up for Boston College, and Steve Adazio and his staff right now are working hard at one level below, getting this team ready for a terrific year. They're trying to catch the business school, which is ranked number 3. If they get to number 3, I told Steve I'll buy him dinner, all right? Good luck to them. I'd like to introduce and thank the co-chairs for this year's conference. They do a lot of work. This isn't just an honorary position. Many conference calls, discussions, they suggest names, they create meetings and make sure everybody is on target with topics. So the co-chairs deserve a big round of applause. As I introduce them, I'd like them to stand up and be recognized. And we start with the life, he'll be co-chair for life. He doesn't know that yet. But Dan Holland, would you stand up, Dan? Co-chair for life. You shouldn't have, right? Thank you, Dan. Also, Lindsay LeBeau, another co-chair for life. Younger than Dan, so it's a longer tenure, Lindsay. Mark Seidner. Mark Seidner, thank you for being co-chair. He signed up for a long tour of duty. Mark. And also a professor who puts in a lot of time, my friend and colleague, John Reuter, in the back of the room. Jonathan Reuter, a finance professor. And talk about someone who challenges his students every single day. And every time I talk to a student who has Jonathan Reuter, they all say he's really tough and he's a great teacher. And that's what we want in the Carroll School. I'm going to get out of the way now and have Lindsay LeBeau come up, and Lindsay will introduce Nick for you. Nick, Lindsay, come on up.
Hi, everyone. I hate going after Andy because he's always so fun and joyful in the morning when all of us are still trying to drink some coffee and get excited about the day. But today we have a great day planned for you. I'm very excited about being able to kick it off by introducing the keynote session, which is named in recognition of the late Dorothy Margaret Rose Knight. And I'm even more excited to be able to introduce Nick Burns. For those of you who have not been to our conference before, Nick has been a speaker and a dear friend of Boston College for many years. And all of his discussions are full of insightful information and very relevant to what's going on today. Today is actually going to be talking about the challenges that we face when it comes to global stability and peace, which I think is a topic that many of us have on the front of our minds, given what's going on in the world today. So for those of you that don't know Nick, I'm going to give you a quick background. Nick is the professor of diplomacy and international relations at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He is faculty chair of the Future of Diplomacy Project and project on Europe and the transatlantic relationship. He serves on the board of directors of the school's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and is a faculty associate at Harvard's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. He is also director of the Aspen Strategy Group and senior counsel at the Cohen Group, and serves on the board of directors of several nonprofit organizations. Nick was a member of Secretary of State John Kerry's Foreign Affairs Policy Board at the U.S. Department of State from 2014 to 2017. He is vice chairman of the American Ditchley Foundation and serves on the panel of senior advisors at the Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Nick served in the U.S. government for 27 years. As a career Foreign Service officer, he was Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs from 2005 to 2008. The State Department's third-ranking official when he led negotiations on the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Agreement and Long-Term Military Assistance Agreement with Israel. and was the lead U.S. negotiator on Iran's nuclear program. He was U.S. ambassador to NATO from 01 to 05, ambassador to Greece from 97 to 01, and State Department spokesman from 95 to 97. He worked for 5 years on the National Security Council at the White House, where he was senior director for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia Affairs, and special assistant to President Clinton, and director for Soviet Affairs in the administration of President George H.W. Bush. Nick has a bachelor's degree in history from Boston College and a master's degree in international relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Please help me in welcoming Nick Burns.
Kathleen, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank Kathleen for that very generous introduction. I want to thank Dan Holland, who has done a magnificent job pulling this together, and Mark Seidner. And I definitely want to thank my BC classmate, Andy Boynton, our great dean at the School of Management here at Boston College. We both hate to admit this, but we graduated 40 years ago this spring. We just were here this past weekend on campus for our 40th reunion, and I must say, what a magnificent college this has become. The proverbial "I could not get in now" is true in my case. I was a lackluster student at Wellesley High School. BC took a chance on me, and I owe it just about everything. 2 of our 3 daughters have been here. 1 daughter's back, getting her master's degree in social work, where we bleed maroon and gold. I second everything Andy said about BC football and basketball and hockey. But our women's teams are the teams that are really performing, the great women's lacrosse team and the women's hockey team. It's a great time for BC. It's a great time intellectually for BC. There's no question if you measure the progress of this institution over, Andy and I can measure it, over 44 years. We go back that far to the autumn of 1974. That in terms of our humanities, arts, and science programs, especially our science, our hard science development here at BC over the last 10 to 15 years, everything that Father Leahy and the board have done to strengthen us in the sciences and prepare us for a 21st century science and tech world, this school is a centerpiece of BC's growth in many ways, the School of Management. I've seen it in our graduates, and I know a lot of BC grads of this school. I see it in the faculty and know a lot of members of the faculty, and I see it in the brilliant leadership that Andy has given. So I think it's only appropriate for us to salute my classmate this morning for his leadership of a School of Management. So for some reason, you're going to be afflicted with me for the next period of time to talk about global trend lines, political, strategic, economic, military. How do we think about the future? If you're in the private sector and you're thinking about long-term investments, what is a stable region for investment, what's not? If you're more in the public sector, you've got to think about the American position in the world. This is a consequential time to think about the positioning of our country and economy in the larger context of the 21st century. So I'm going to address some of that this morning. I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. That's always the most interesting point. And that's what this finance conference is meant to be, is an exchange of views. So I'm not going to speak forever. No Castro-like 4-hour speech is forthcoming. I can assure you this morning. I have some slides, but I don't want to also subject you to death by PowerPoint so early in the morning. So I'll use the slides if they're relevant. But I just have 4 or 5 major points I wanted to make. Here's the first point. This is a time of hope. And I say that because if you turn on any cable TV channel or read the op-ed pages of the Journal or the Post or the Times, you think we live in the age of pessimism. Boy, are we introspective in America. We're having this minute debate about the future of the country, about our politics, about our unorthodox president. I don't say that in a political way. He's unorthodox. I think he described himself that way. It's a chaotic time in the country in a lot of ways. Social media has given us almost a minute-by-minute introspection that we never had in the past. And when I look at the media and I interview frequently, a lot of pessimism out there. So let me start with optimism. Here's how I'd frame it, that this is a time of hope. I taught a class at Harvard this past semester called Great Powers. And the goal of the course was to look at the major global economies, the countries with capacity, economic and military. So the United States, China, India, Russia, the European Union, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Brazil. And the question is, how can those countries coalesce to take on the big human problems that we face, climate change, crime and drug cartels, human trafficking rings, pandemics, et cetera? That's number one question. The second question was, where might they collide? So our whole semester we were immersed in problems and in some pretty harrowing scenarios about where global politics and military power is heading. So I said to the students, let's have one class where we get away from death, destruction, and war and talk about strategic hope. And I asked the class of 75 students from 22 countries, by the way, a simple question. Don't tell me what you wish for. Tell me where you see analytically positive opportunities so that we can push open on those opportunities and achieve something for the world. Here's what they came back with, to start off with time of hope. Number one thing they're hopeful about, the global economy. Global economy is in growth. Every major global economy is in positive economic growth. We've not been there since 2005-06. Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, came to the Kennedy School at the invitation of Larry Summers and I. Larry and I run a program to try to get economic policy makers and diplomats to come to Harvard. And her first and second and third prescription for us, she said, this is a very positive time for the global economy. Our job is to get out of the way and help it move forward. And our students, whether they were Brazilian or Indian or Chinese or European or American, feel positive. The American students, about 3.8% unemployment. About a growing tech sector, just look at Kendall Square, Cambridge, Mass. Look at the Seaport. Look at Research Triangle. Look at Austin, Texas. Look at the biotech sector in San Diego. Look at Silicon Valley. We are competing successfully, the United States, the American people, in the big tech opportunities in the digital age that's emerging. Number one, positive about that. Number two, we're living in the time of the greatest alleviation of poverty in human history is the last 30 years. That ought to be a headline of at least Fox News, MSNBC, or one of our major papers. You rarely see that. But analytically, given Deng Xiaoping's revolution in China, and the Chinese are responsible for a lot of this, but the private sector revolution underway in India, in this incredible economy that's emerging in India, it'll be the largest global economy by the end of the century, long time from now. By the fact that 2 years ago, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world were in sub-Saharan Africa. That Brazil is emerging from its political and economic crisis to be the engine in the Western Hemisphere, and that our great neighbors, Canada and Mexico, are also succeeding. This is a time of hope. More than 1 billion people lifted out of poverty in 30 years. We've never seen anything like it. That's hopeful. Third positive trend lines, global public health. So we, the human race, there are 7.6 billion of us. That'll grow to about 9 billion by mid-century. We have not eradicated a global disease since smallpox. Polio is about to be eradicated. Polio only exists right now in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria, in isolated parts of those 3 countries, by the way, because the vaccine programs have been so extensive and so well funded by public and private sector. We're just about to eradicate a disease that was a scourge worldwide until very recently. My mom was a polio victim in 1949 in Hingham, Massachusetts. Lots of people were until Dr. Salk's vaccine of 1952. It took 60 years to get the results of that vaccine spread all around the world in publicly and privately financed programs. We're almost there. Bill Gates came to Harvard to kick off our capital campaign, which is just mercifully ending at the end of this month. $9.2 billion raised for our university. We're so proud of what we've done. But he came to kick it off, and he He said, we, the human race, can eradicate malaria. He thought in his lifetime, he's a relatively young man, Andy, he's 64 years old. I think that's relatively young for a young man. Gates said, if the science is going to be there, if we have the distribution systems, and if they're publicly and privately financed, and if they're made available to the poorest countries, Gates thinks that we can eradicate malaria. Nearly 500,000 kids died of malaria in sub-Saharan Africa alone last year. Think of the lives saved. Think of the enormous potential of saving all those lives if we can eradicate malaria. Last example in public health is HIV. HIV now, for a lot of people around the world, because of the presence of antiretroviral drugs, is now more of a chronic illness versus a mortal disease. And we see that in sub-Saharan Africa, where the incident rates were extraordinarily high, have been for the last 2 decades. But because of George W. Bush's PEPFAR program, $30 billion of US money, and this was bipartisan, by the way, supported by the Democrats 12 years ago, the United States and foundations and corporations have been able to mass capital and treatment programs, and HIV rates are coming down all over the world. Very hopeful time. That's the third positive things my students told me. Fourth, they're young and idealistic and they're millennials, so they believe in the promise of technology. Not that I don't, but I think a lot of us see the double edge of technology going forward. But our students say, because they're so comfortable with it, whereas if you're graduates of the class of 1978, we kind of still speak with an accent when it comes to technology. Our students feel so comfortable with it, they think the promise of biotechnology, of nanotechnology, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, on and on. They think there are tremendous applications for disease prevention, for global economic growth, for just bursting through barriers that our generation felt were insurmountable, too strong to burst through. Cancer, could it be eradicated? Could it be cured? We wouldn't have said that about polio 40 years ago. We're just about to eradicate it. So there's potential there on the tech side. One double edge that I should mention, take a look at Bill Gates's very short, I think 6 or 7 page article in the most recent issue of Foreign Affairs. He talks about gene editing. A lot of my students drew my attention to gene editing. Gates gives 2 examples of the promise of gene editing. He says the population of Africa is going to double in the next 40 years. And so there's going to be a tremendous impetus to expand food production by dramatically measurable terms. Gates said in this article, we can now alter the genetic structure of wheat in Africa. We can also, he says, alter the genetic structure of cattle in Africa to make them doubly productive. The second example he gives is that we can now alter the genetic structure of mosquitoes, Zika-carrying mosquitoes, to make them sterile. He says there's tremendous promise here if you're worried about pandemics, disease, food production, but he rightly says, but here's the double edge. There are all sorts of ethical concerns before you actually unleash gene editing on the world that governments are going to have difficult regulating, but you've got to deal with that double edge. And I think my students feel it, but they feel more the promise. But boy, is this an exciting time. And last, and this wasn't just the women in my class, it was a lot of the young men. A lot of my millennial students think this is the age of women. That finally, father of 3 daughters, finally women have a chance to succeed and achieve leadership levels in a way that even our generation of women in our generation were not able to aspire to. And boy, my female students think they can do anything, and they can, and they are. And we're seeing it in the State Department, where I spent a lot of my career. We've had 3 female Secretary of States, and they have just completely abolished the glass ceiling that had held women down in the US government. We're seeing it in corporate America, we're seeing it in the financial world, we're seeing it in academia. It's a wonderful thing to see. I wanted to start with the positive trend lines, Because part of what we have to do as communities, the BC community, the SOM community, the United States of America community, 323 million of us is, and so often our politicians don't ask us, how can we all combine efforts to push forward on the positive opportunities, to coalesce on them, to actually eradicate malaria and polio, to actually bring women into corporate boards in numbers that make sense given the role that women play in this society. We just marked the tragic death 50 years ago of Robert Kennedy yesterday. I remember where I was in the 6th grade in 1968 when that happened. Tragic death of Martin Luther King. In the 60s, despite the turbulence, a lot of our politicians asked us to respond to the better angels of our nature. They put peace before us as an endpoint that we could strive towards. It's almost like we live in the age of fear and pessimism. Our politicians now say, vote for me, I'll make you safe. 50 years ago, despite the problems of 1968, the racial problems, the war, the Vietnam War, the assassinations, 3 assassinations of national leaders in that decade, our politicians were challenging us to do better and to achieve great human progress. That has to be part of our national conversation. I think that's missing. I think it's almost missing in our universities. We got to inject that into the classroom. It's certainly missing in the national discussion. This is a time of hope. And part of what we have to do, public sector, private sector, universities, is coalesce and make big human progress. But it's also, it's a time of challenges. Boy, do we have problems. I don't think we should exaggerate them. If you think about climate change, trafficking of women and children, crime and drug cartels, the whole range of cyber problems, pandemics, rise of China, Putin's back, those are some of the problems we face globally, that President Trump is facing, that the Congress is facing. Because of our social media world, we're so introspective. Sometimes we think, well, we live in the most complicated time. We don't. The revolution was more difficult against the United Kingdom. The War of 1812, when Britain, not Canada, burned down the White House, the English, was more challenging. The War of the Southern Rebellion, and that's the only way to think about the Civil War. The South rebelled against the Union. That's the way, go into our graveyards here. The War of the Rebellion. That was the greatest crisis we ever faced, and Lincoln and Grant led us through it. But you have to think about what our parents lived through. The combination of the Great Depression, of this huge contraction of the American economy of 35% unemployment in 1932 and 33 and 34. And then the two-front war of 1937, Japanese invasion of China, to 1945. That generation faced a lot tougher challenges than we have. So we've got to keep it in perspective. But this is a complicated time for us. And as I think about the challenges, I think 3 or 4 come to mind as most prominent for us. Just had a great breakfast with some of the people here who have been leading this effort for the finance conference. If we're an American these days, got to think first and foremost about China. Second largest economy to us. Second strongest military following us. The country with huge self-confidence right now in the world is China. I gave the example, Dan, at breakfast. The Belt Road Initiative. The Belt Road Initiative of China engages 68 countries, and they've already spent $1 trillion. The Marshall Plan, just to keep that in perspective, which is probably the most ambitious thing the United States has done economically in the world in 73 years. In 2018 dollars, the Marshall Plan from 47 to 52 or 3 is $180 billion. The Belt Road Initiative is $1 trillion and counting. China is saying to the rest of the world, we have the model. It's state capitalism. It's a free market system with a lot of state companies engineered by Beijing and an authoritarian political system. Now, we Americans we oppose that model on human rights, democracy grounds, but you have to admire what the Chinese have been able to do. They're the rising society in the East, and by mid-century, 2050, when we'll be celebrating other BC reunions in our dotage. China and the United States and Japan and India will be both the 4 strongest economies in the world and the 4 strongest militaries in the world. So in a way, we're living through this huge transition in global power. If you think of it maybe in historical terms, the Mediterranean Atlantic world, in which Boston is a big part, we've been the dominant global economy, Europe, for 5 centuries. All the great military powers of the last 5 centuries, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the empires, the French, Napoleon, Britain's 150-year reign as the greatest power in the world, and now the United States, over the last 73 years since the end of the Second World War, it's been an Atlantic, Mediterranean-dominated world. There's no question by mid-century it's going to be a Pacific world. The Trump administration is using a phrase that I agree with, the Indo-Pacific. So if we brought the map, and let's see if we can put a map up here. And I'll go to Asia. Everywhere from the east coast of Africa, the Persian Gulf, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, the Arabian Sea, there's the subcontinent, there's the Bay of Bengal to the east of the continent. The key strategic choke point in the world today, if that's a laser pointer, is the Strait of Malacca to the big Asian economies of the world. 60% of all container traffic swings west-east, east-west in this part of the world, 50% of all the oil and gas, 4 major economies and global powers. There we are as a Pacific country just off the edge of my map. This is the new power center. Robert Kaplan, the great American strategist, said in his 2010 book, Monsoon, this is where power is going to be. So the big challenge for us is to center ourselves in this map, economically, militarily. We've been the predominant military power since 1945, and to have the self-confidence to think of ourselves as the regional leader here. In a curious way, the partner that has the greatest capacity for us, with us, is China. If we want to manage this global trading system and keep the global economy stable, China's the second largest economy with capacity and growing. If we want to take on climate change, and we ought to want to take on climate change, I'm an acceptor, not a denier of the science, China is right with us as the largest carbon emitter. If we want to end human trafficking rings, the country with capacity to help us do that is China. So China's our strongest partner. But the dilemma for the Americans and Chinese is we're also each other's strongest competitor. Because on this map since 1945, the United States has been the great strategic power. Japan's our ally. South Korea's our ally. Australia's our ally. The Philippines is an ally. Thailand's an ally. And for Americans of Andy and my age, Vietnam wants the Navy, our Navy, to come back to Cam Ranh Bay because they tell us, we only fought you for 13 years. We've been struggling against Chinese power for 1,000 years. The biggest strategic move we've made as a country, and it doesn't get enough attention, and George W. Bush deserves a lot of credit, as does Barack Obama, as does Donald Trump. They've all said this country is the new big strategic partner of the United States. We've quadrupled trade in goods and services with India in 12 years. By the end of this century, it's going to be the largest global economy. It's a rule of law democracy, highly imperfect if you've been to India and try to do business there. But enormous potential. Militarily, will spend more in its national defense than any other country in the world in the next 20 years. It sees itself in alignment with us, with the Japanese, because it doesn't want to fight China, but it fears the expansion of Chinese military power. So boy, are we setting up for a struggle for power where these democratic countries, the United States, Japan, India, Australia, even Singapore, not democratic, but with us in this game, we want to make sure that these countries have enough power that China cannot push out, as it's doing in the Spratly and Paracel Islands of the South China Sea, against Japan and the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, to try to dominate militarily. This is the greatest challenge we face geopolitically. We're going to hand this baton off to our kids and our grandchildren. They're going to have to take it forward. The good news is George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump all agree on what must need to be done. Maintain our military strength, maintain our alliances strategically, and yet be open to a partnership relationship with China at the same time. That's going to require sophistication. I mean, we've never had a relationship since the War of 1812, which is in the news these days, that our strongest partner, Britain in 1812, is our strongest competitor. You have to go back to that war to find a time when we found ourselves in a relationship where China is both competitor and partner. We're going to have to be skillful in keeping that going. That's challenge number one. North Korea, I would just say this. I think the president has brought us to a good place. There are no easy answers here. And I think as the president, as he threatened the North Koreans in 2007, and the North Koreans threatened him back last year, I think it became clear to the United States military as they looked at the war scenarios, they were all bad, if not catastrophic. One option for the administration last year was called the bloody nose strategy. Why don't we hit Kim Jong-un's nuclear weapons force and hit his military just to knock him back and force him to negotiate? The only problem with that scenario is nobody was sure what Kim would do, because at that time, the only American who'd ever spoken to him was Dennis Rodman. A very good ex-basketball player, but not the guy to negotiate the nuclear weapons future of the world. And I read yesterday that Rodman literally is on his way to Singapore. God help us if he gets in the room. So we were in this strategic disadvantage. We'd never talked to this guy. Nobody had talked to him. And I think as the Trump team looked at the scenarios, they thought, what if he fires back? He has one of the greatest conventional artillery forces in the world. There are 30 million civilians living in a radius around Seoul. Secretary Mattis was talking about casualties in the hundreds of thousands. So they looked at that and said, that doesn't make coherent sense. And I think President Trump has rightly decided, I'm going to give diplomacy a chance. I'm in favor of this meeting in Singapore that happens our time Monday evening, Tuesday. I think probably right to start at the head of state level. I know the president's critics are out there saying he's wrong to do it. Well, look, we've failed in the past with North Korea. If we can keep China on our side, and Trump has had a lot of success, more than his predecessors, in getting the Chinese to do more in sanctions, keep the South Koreans and Japanese close, because we need them close to us. If Trump can keep that coalition together, then maybe Singapore, June 11, 12, represents the beginning, but only the beginning. This is going to take years to convince North Korea to dismantle an existing nuclear weapons force, of uranium enrichment plants, of plutonium processing, of who knows how many nuclear weapons he has. He doesn't want to do it. And so it's going to be a question, can we coerce him? And can we work with him through moral suasion as well? A combination of pressure and dialogue. It's going to take a remarkably persistent effort. I think Mike Pompeo has the ability to do this. I'm very impressed by him, by the way, as our Secretary of State. He's got all the experience, toughness, and I think level of sophistication to be the lead negotiator. The question I'd have about President Trump, however, is, does he have the patience? Because this big summit's going to be a photo op and some words. I mean, that's not diminishing it. The real work starts the next day after the president and Kim leave Singapore. And based on my own experience in nuclear negotiations, Iran negotiations, India negotiations, working with the Russians and against the Soviets, it's going to take years. So do we have the patience to stay with this diplomatic track? I think that's the question for President Trump. So much talk about in Asia. Middle East, I'm just going to give you the headline because we'd be here all day and into next year's finance conference. I think the revolutions of 2011 failed, unfortunately. Those wonderful, virtuous kids in the streets of Cairo and Tunis and Damascus and Amman, Jordan, and Bahrain, and we're back to authoritarianism. There's tremendous instability in the Middle East. Libya, failed state. Yemen, failed state. Yemen, a victim of a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, a religious proxy war. 10,000 civilians dead. greatest cholera epidemic in world history has taken place in the last year in Yemen. Famine in Yemen. Iraq blown apart by the war and its aftermath and its division among Shia, Sunni, and Kurd. Syria completely destabilized. 12 million people in Syria out of the 22.4 million people are homeless today because of this vicious civil war. 400,000 people dead. The Middle East has been, it's a cancer that's metastasized that war throughout the region. I think we have to assume another decade or more of instability. Maybe Morocco and Tunisia will be better off. In the corner of North Africa, Egypt, these 4 failed states are going to destabilize the region for a long time to come. If you're doing business in Saudi Arabia, many of you are, or the Emirates, or Oman, these are stable countries. I think they'll ride out the storms. Although these reforms in Saudi Arabia are not a given, that they're going to succeed economically or politically or socially, but the Middle East is facing another generation of instability. I worry more in the short term as well, I should say, about Europe. I said that the future is in Asia, but right now, 3 data points, our strongest economic partner is the European Union. It's our leading trade partner. It's the leading investor into our economy. And there's 27 European countries and Canada as our NATO allies. It's where a lot of the power is. And as the Quebec summit starts tomorrow, Prime Minister Trudeau is hosting it. I must say, I cannot remember a time when I started in the US government in 1980 as an intern in the Carter administration, where our alliance with Europe has been so fraught with misunderstandings and disagreements, bad feelings, and division. President Trump and Chancellor Merkel are not going to meet bilaterally in Quebec. I can't remember a time when the German Chancellor and the American President didn't huddle, because she's the key leader in Europe, and she leads the dominant European economy. Our relations with the United Kingdom are at a low. Our president and Theresa May are not getting along. Our president and President Macron, that honeymoon is ended. And the Europeans, just to describe their point of view, the United States has left the Paris Climate Agreement. And for the Europeans, that's the #1 issue in Europe in public opinion, climate. Not here, but it is in Europe. We've left the Iran nuclear deal. Well, Condi Rice and I started the negotiations with Britain, France, and Germany. They were, for 10 years, our negotiating partner. We walked out, no plan B. And now we've tried something that I hadn't seen before, and I'm going to be critical here. Trade wars that we've unleashed, not that we're guilty, not that we don't have merit on our side in some of these trade questions, by the way. Trump is right to focus on trade, but to start trade wars with Mexico, Canada, the European Union, South Korea, Japan, and China simultaneously, you have to question the tactical effectiveness of it. The presidents would be right to go after China. He'd be stronger to have Japan, South Korea, and Europe on our side, and to take them one by one. But to do it all together and to blow apart the international trading regime that Republicans have built more than anybody in our country over 70 years, I think you have to question that tactically. So big problems with Europe. And finally, I just ask a series of questions about the United States. I was a diplomat for a long time. I now teach. So, my preoccupation in my adult life has been the position of the United States in the world and how we can succeed as a global leader. I think we all know what made us great. It was our ability to lead these big alliances in Asia and in Europe, the East Asian Treaty Alliance system and NATO. It's an incredible force for good and stability and power in the world. And every president, from Truman and Eisenhower down, in both parties have said, probably the greatest source of American power in the world is our alliance system. And this president has been questioning that. He's made some good points about NATO allies needing to pay more. I agree with that. But if you are ambivalent publicly about NATO, as he's been, if you actively consider and describe the EU as a competitor entity, not also as a partner, if you don't help the Japanese and South Koreans out, when they need it economically, then these alliances begin to fray. So one question is, we need to rethink our alliances, modernize them, yes, but maintain them. The second big challenge to us is, are we a free trade nation or not? And there is mass confusion and no real substitute plan, but it looks like Washington is trying to manage trade. I don't know how that works successfully in a $17 trillion US economy. No group of people can be smart enough and visionary enough and prescient enough to make the right decisions about the automotive industry or the financial industry, whatever it is. I think we've mostly all believed, most of us, that market forces do that more efficiently. I'm a free market, free trade person. We have to think about immigration and refugees because it's part of our existential basis. It's the third big question about American power that President Trump has unleashed. Nobody wants to see unmanaged illegal immigration. No one should. But we have been taking in for the last 4 or 5 decades about 100,000 immigrants a year. The advantage to us is that demographically it makes us a younger country. Economically, makes us a younger country as well. And of all the great powers that I mentioned, India and the United States are the 2 youngest. We'll have more people paying taxes and working to support the older people in retirement than the Chinese, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Russians, or the Europeans, mainly because of immigration. That's keeping the United States younger as an economic entity. And refugees do too. We've been taking in about 70,000 refugees a year. We know how to do it. We're a big country. Mainly the private sector, church groups and civic groups take in the refugees. We do it well. We have a very successful Muslim community, small, 4 or 5 million people, highly educated, professional, lawyers, doctors, business people, small business people. We're succeeding as an immigrant nation and a refugee nation. There are advantages economically and socially and to the ethic of the country, e pluribus unum. And I fear that in basically trying to have immigration, restricting refugees from majority Muslim countries, applying a religious means test, it gets us away from 70 years of saying we're not going to keep people out based on religion or the color of their skin. For those of us who are Irish, myself, Italian, BC built. BC was created in 1863 for the immigrant communities who were discriminated against. We don't want to go back there. That's a big question mark for all of us to think about. And last, I'd say this, if the weaknesses and questions are alliances, trade, immigration, are we going to consider ourselves the leader of the Western world? I mean, it's a pretty awesome title. That's what Ronald Reagan was. It's what Kennedy was. It's what Eisenhower was. Just to name 3 of our great post-World War II presidents. In addition to everything else I've talked about this morning, they saw themselves as the leader of democratic nations around the world. And right now, if you look at Europe, democracy is being challenged by right-wing anti-democratic populists like Marine Le Pen. In France, Geert Wilders. In the Netherlands, Alternative for Deutschland. In Germany, the Hungarian government, the Polish government. And what Europe needs is an American president who will say, democracy is the way forward. What the rest of the world needs in responding to Xi Jinping is, we admire your economic expansion. We do not admire your authoritarian political system where you put people in jail because of their religious and political beliefs. The answer to Putin has to be, we're going to stand up for what's right in the world, a free, democratic, whole Europe, not succumb to Putin's division, Georgia, Ukraine, Baltic states. And we've been flagging on that leadership role. So I think those are the challenges we have to face. We're a remarkably successful society. In a lot of ways, this is a great time to come out of BC to the School of Management, go into the business world with such a rollicking economy, with so many opportunities, exciting ones. But I'll leave you with 2 quotes from 2 really brilliant people. Maybe that helps us frame the dilemma for us. I've been very close to Condi Rice in my career. I've worked for her twice. I deeply admire her. I interviewed her at a public session in Colorado last summer, and I said to her, What are the great challenges we face and what are you worried about? And without missing a beat, she said, we've lost our self-confidence. I was really struck by that. I've been thinking about it since. I think she was thinking about sometimes the tepid nature of President Obama, say in the Middle East, maybe, in my view, I'll just put it into my words, over-learning the lessons of our difficulties, real difficulties, our tragedy in Iraq, but over-learning it, becoming so cautious that we began to step back in that leadership role. We're definitely seeing that objectively, not politically, not trying to score points under President Trump. When you take yourself out of Paris climate change, out of the Iran deal, alter a 70-year position on Jerusalem, launch these trade wars, I mean, the rest of the world sees us stepping back, and we're the global leader. We're the number one economy, number one political influencer, number one military. So when we step back, the world gets worried. Have we lost our self-confidence that we can make a big impact in the world? It can be positive. I believe we can. I know Condi Rice does. I know most of us do. We need to get the self-confidence back that we can be positive, a positive force in the world. And I guess the biggest issue for us as Americans is to debate and discuss together is, are we going to be in this world, 21st century world, leading it? Or are we going to kind of pull back, dig a moat around the country and pull up the drawbridges? Churchill, such a wise person, came to Harvard September 6, 1943. This was an important time in global history. I'm going to close on his quote. Montgomery, the British 8th Army, had stopped Rommel at El Alamein, 65 kilometers west of Alexandria. That prevented the Germans from getting the Suez Canal and the oil fields of the Middle East. That was a huge strategic victory. So Churchill came after El Alamein. He came after the Soviets had stopped von Paulus and the German 6th Army at Stalingrad, the most horrific battle of World War II. More than 1 million people killed. Soviets had stopped him, and they began to go on the offensive. We had already initiated the invasion of Sicily, and we and the British in September 1943 were beginning the invasion of Italy, the march up to defeat Mussolini and go after Nazi Germany. So we were going to win the war. Churchill came. His country had been the greatest power in the world for 150 years. Metaphorically, it was almost as if Churchill was handing that baton of leadership to FDR and the American people, and the students from Radcliffe and Harvard in front of him. You know what he said? He said to these students, he said, the United States cannot escape world responsibility. And he said, the price of greatness is responsibility. If you want to be great, you have to take responsibility to lead. And for me, that's the central issue we face in this time of cacophony and division and red-blue and north-south and liberal-conservative wars. It's so dispiriting to be on Twitter. And you praise President Trump and the left comes after you, and you criticize President Trump and the right comes after you and the ugliness. But that's not who we are. We're so much better than that. We are so strong. Our private sector is so strong in the world. We just need to recenter ourselves, overcome some of these social differences, but remember how much the rest of the world and our own self-interest depends on us being out in the world leading, not shrinking from that global leadership. That was what I wanted the central message to be this morning. There's so much to talk about. I'm happy to talk about anything I've discussed or haven't discussed. I'll try my best to answer your questions. But Andy, thank you for the great success of the School of Management, of BC, and of this finance conference. Thank you for the invitation to be with you this morning. And should I just call on people?
Sure.
Okay. Yes, sir. Maybe just give me your name and Walter. Great. Mike is coming.
Walter KC, class of 66, Turkey. How did we get to wherever we are today there, and where is this thing going? Where is Turkey going?
Yeah. Tough. This is a great question about Turkey. If we'd been here 10 years ago today, I think we all would have said, Turkey is the great secular Muslim nation. It's democratic. It's a fast-growing free market economy. It's the literal bridge, as it's always been, between the Asia world and the Middle East world, European world and Middle East world, the Asia world. And a country that is our strongest military ally in NATO. It's none of those things now. There's been a revolution politically, a religiously dominated party to bring much more Islam into government has taken over under President Erdogan. He's become an autocratic leader in large part because of the attempted assassination and coup d'etat of July 2016. Nearly 100,000 Turks have been arrested. I have Turkish friends who are mainstream patriots who cannot go back to their country out of fear of arrest. It's turned against the United States. He turned against both President Obama and President Trump. Both Obama and Trump have tried to work with him. He's a difficult ally. Walter, I think it's one of those questions. You can't kick him out of NATO because NATO operates by consensus. So if there was a motion to kick Turkey out of NATO because it's anti-democratic, Turkey would veto it, and therefore it would stay in. I think we're going to have to work with Turkey inside NATO because we need that Turkish military power on the southern flank underneath Russia. We're back to containing Russian power. The dream of Turkey coming into the EU has been smashed. The Europeans just won't do it and can't afford it. And I think the idea of the EU expanding again, it won't happen. If Brexit and the 2016 and 17 elections in Europe mean anything, look at the German election of September, it's the European people have a lot of questions about the EU's future and don't want to see the EU taking on a lot more in the way of people coming into the Schengen system, the ability to work in European countries. The market's just not going to support it, the market of public opinion. So I think we're stuck with a very difficult partner and ally in Turkey for the time being, with no easy answers. Patience required of us. Can't rise to every challenge of Erdogan. Try to keep the Turks on side. Hope that the Turks will return to their senses and become more democratic in the future. It's the best I can do to a very good question. We've seen economic growth slow. Tremendous social problems in the country. Difficult place right now. Yes, right behind you. There should be a mic coming right to you.
Thank you. John Clavin, 84, so a little newer than you guys, but I'm just curious, if when you look way ahead to academia and the way that it's going to embrace or maybe not Trump's unorthodox nature and what he's doing in diplomacy, I'm just wondering, how do you think academia is going to deal with this sort of presidency and the fact that they've torn up the playbook, they've changed the way that negotiations and diplomacy is being done? I mean, maybe it's premature to predict, but is it going to be cast aside as sort of irrelevant and not, and kind of go back to the old playbook, or how will it change sort of future generations of diplomacy, both in academia and the way that it kind of plays out?
The Trump revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the way that he's doing things totally different than
Yeah.
50 years of doing it, kind of the same way.
Yep. I think it's a real issue. Just to take one slice of your question first, I worry that in some of our college campuses, I'll just name the one where I teach right now, Harvard, difficult to find conservative voices. Sometimes our conservative students feel that they can't speak up because it's not socially acceptable. That's a problem. I just invited Dina Powell, I don't know if you know that name, I know Dan knows Dina from Goldman Sachs, to be a fellow in my program. Dina is a conservative, she's Republican, and she worked for President Trump, and I felt we needed someone like her to come up a couple times a semester to give her point of view and to maybe center us a little bit on what President Trump's trying to do. We're making an effort, at least at the Harvard Kennedy School, to try to get more conservative voices on campus because our students should not live in a deep blue bubble. On the other hand, there are a lot of deep red bubbles in other parts of the country, and that they need some cross-fertilization itself. I'll give you two examples. I spoke at Texas A&M about 2 months ago, and that's a campus, 66,000 students, where there's probably a slightly more Trump sentiment than Democratic sentiment. I spoke at the University of Tennessee, there's 25,000 students in Knoxville. That's kind of even. We're probably 99 to 1. I've not measured it, but it feels like it. So actually, we're actually talking about, to some of these campuses, about having student exchanges. It's not just ideology, too. It's regional. It's south-north. There's so many divisions that I never thought would kind of reappear. And as citizens, we need to begin to erase those divisions. So that's part of being an educator, is creating an environment where conservative students and liberal students both feel comfortable speaking up so they won't be ostracized. In terms of President Trump's unorthodoxy, he's clearly, he prides himself on being unorthodox. He thinks that the model of the last 70 years has not succeeded. And so he's overturning everything I talked about: alliances, trade, immigration, refugees, support for democracy. I disagree with him on all those issues. I think he's failing on all of them. But I think I think he has a right to try new things. So I gave the example of North Korea, where you start with a summit as opposed to ending with it, which is conventional diplomacy. We need to be open to a new way of doing things. But I worry that he has dismantled so much of what made us strong. And by the way, there was a Republican-Democrat consensus on all those 4 issues I mentioned. There still is in the Senate. You go up and talk to the major Republican senators and Democratic senators, they pretty much agree that NATO and the East Asian alliances, the free trade structure, managed immigration and refugees, and leading on democracy are vital for us. The president disagrees. I wish him well because I want him to succeed, but I'm not sure he's going to succeed. I think that he's not listening enough to his really sophisticated advisors, Pompeo and Mattis, to be specific on the political military side. I worry that he takes us out of big international agreements, but then doesn't replace it with a strategy where we can succeed. And you need to do that. Change is not bad, but you got to have a theory of the case of how your view is going to lead us in a stronger position. I don't see that right now, so I'm worried. I'm worried about the course that his administration has taken. Questions, comments? Yes, sir. And a mic will come to you in a couple of seconds.
Richard O'Neill, class of '96. To those issues you just spoke about, how far do you feel we're down the road? If say, in a couple of years we get another president with different views, are we welcome back into climate change agreements? Are we welcome back into the Iran deal? Are the damage that's being done irreversible, or do you think some of these partners would be welcome to change if someone else came into office in a couple of years?
You know, I don't think it's irreversible, because I've been a critic. I think that we can win back no matter who's, well, if there's a change and if a Republican comes in or a Democrat who is more in the tradition of, say, George H.W. Bush or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush. I worked for all 3 of them. They essentially believe the same things on America's power position in the world. I don't think it's a situation where we can't recover, but I say this. Other governments will quickly realign with the United States. I worry sometimes about public opinion. And let me just use the example of climate change. We're the only major industrial society where there's even a debate. The rest of the world, industrial world, there's no debate. They believe the 1,200 scientists of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that the production and acceleration of gases in the atmosphere are changing the climate in negative ways. And I think the most damaging thing in terms of public opinion around the world that we've done is to leave the Paris Agreement, because along with China, we're the largest emitter of carbon. And so we're responsible. And every other country is involved in trying to do something about it, and the largest carbon emitter takes itself out. You can imagine what people feel. And so it's one thing to have governments on your side. It's equally important to have global public opinion believing that you're a credible world leader. I think we've lost probably more there than we have. Governments have no alternative but to work with us. You'll see that at Quebec tomorrow. That's going to be a pretty frosty summit. And unfortunately, I've never seen this before. This is the G7. These are the 7 leading global economies. And then they also meet, of course, on the second day with China and India and the emerging economies. It's the first time I've ever seen a statement where there's a G6 plus 1. where the finance ministers, when they met last week, 6 had one view and the United States had another. It's not always bad to be on the outside, but when you've got everyone arrayed against you, and everyone is Germany, Italy, Canada, Britain, France, this is not a comfortable position for us. We are self-isolating, and yet not providing an alternative for countries to follow. And that is something I think this administration is going to have to work on. To give the Trump administration a chance, I guess you'd have to say there's been a remarkable change, a sea change in the leadership of the administration in the last 3 months. When you change the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State, and you bring in new people to senior positions, it's going to take a while for things to shake down. I think the new Secretary of State is by far proving to be more effective as a manager of the State Department of our diplomacy and been a very effective interlocutor with Kim Jong-un, Mike Pompeo. I don't share the same sentiment about John Bolton. I know him very well. I've worked with him in the Bush administrations, and I think that H.R. McMaster was a much more effective representative of our military political community than Bolton is. I worry of Gary Cohn leaving. As the senior economic advisor, I'm a friend with Larry Kudlow, but I think President Trump has just decided to turn in a radical direction. One thing about the presidency, when you observe it, is that it's the toughest job in the world. You've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. When I worked for President Clinton, I thought, he struggled in his first year in a lot of ways. He was a better president in years 3 and 4 and 5. Same was true of George W. Bush, worked for him. It takes a while. I think a lot of us were hoping that President Trump would be adaptive, as corporate leaders need to be. You're not great the first day. You adapt. You're better 6 months in, a year in. I don't think we can say that right now, but I hope we'll be able to say it a year from now. So it's still a little early to judge. 16 months into a presidency, and we hope we hope he succeeds. But we have bitten off probably more than we can chew in the short term in terms of the national security challenges that I've just tried to outline this morning. I'll give you an example. In Europe, Putin is back. He is contesting the borders of Europe. I'll put the map of Europe on the screen. He invaded Georgia in 2008. Georgia's now divided into three different, Georgia's off the map, unfortunately, down at the bottom of the map below Turkey. He invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, annexed it in February 2014. No European leader had done that since Hitler and Mussolini. He's pressuring the 3 Baltic states. They're all NATO allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania up north. He's threatened Poland. We're back to containment. One of the things that both President Obama and President Trump have done well and done together is we've rebuilt the armored capacity of the United States in Europe. When we went to fight, I was ambassador to NATO in 2001 on 9/11. We basically emptied out our armored capacity in Germany, Italy, and Britain to deploy to Afghanistan and then Iraq. Over the last 15 years, we're bringing the troops back to Germany now and to Italy, armored divisions now, increasing our air power because we've got to contain Putin in Eastern Europe. He's 64. He's probably president for life. We're going to have to deal with him for a long time. We're not back to the Cold War, but we're back on a north-south line south of the Russian Federation, west of it, to containing Russian power. Putin has this concept of strategic depth. He wants to effectively control the countries to his south and west. He doesn't want to occupy them, but effectively control them because he fears the power of Germany and of NATO and of the European Union. So Trump and Obama have had to rearm in a way. It's gotten very little public attention, but it's an important thing that we've done. We have real leadership responsibilities in Europe. And we didn't talk much about Europe. Look at the challenges they face. I've been talking pretty regularly with my British friends, including members of Parliament, They see very little possibility, maybe a probability of less than 10%, that Britain by March 2019, next March, can avoid Brexit. This is the second largest economy in the EU. It's the strongest military. It's by far the most globally oriented country in the EU, Britain. It's going to be out. It's going to weaken the EU. Britain's been the connector between the US and the EU politically in a lot of ways. And it may have very profound consequences for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I hope it doesn't. But are the Scots going to hold a second referendum in the next 10 years? I would say the probability of that happening is high. And for those of us who are Irish American, who reflect on the incredible tragedies of Irish history, of the Easter Rebellion, of the 6-Year War for Irish independence, we thought that was settled. Brexit means that a hard border is going to be reimposed between Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, because the Republic's in the EU, and Sinn Féin, the Irish Nationalist Party in Dublin, says, this is our chance to unite Ireland. And they've launched a campaign, again, to bring the Northern Irish in. Will the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland become the United Kingdom of England and Wales 10 years from now? I don't think it's probable. It's possible. This is our pound for pound best friend. And it's going to go through an existential crisis the next 10 years. So look at that issue. And then look at that issue. And then this issue. You know, we've had 1.2 million refugees come from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan into Europe the last 3 years. This is the greatest movement of people since 1945 anywhere in the world. It's going to be even more challenging in the next 10 to 20 because economic migrants from the economically unsuccessful economies of North Africa, Central and West Africa are going to continue to stream into Europe. The Europeans are going to have a major challenge trying to decide how to deal with this. How open is the door going to be and how closed should it be? What are the societal implications and economic implications of that? You've got much more terrorism in Europe than you do in the United States and Canada. Far greater threat because there are Islamists in Brussels and Berlin, Paris, who don't feel part of the society. We have a loyal, patriotic, successful Muslim community in our country. You've got the Putin challenge. We have the weakening of the US commitment, which has shocked the Europeans. Andy, let me say one thing. I know we've got maybe 5 minutes left. A lot of people debate me, well, why do we need NATO? Isn't Trump right? On September 11th, 2001, I was a very new American ambassador to NATO. We were hit hard. We were 6 hours ahead of Washington and New York. I couldn't reach by phone or email the Pentagon, State Department, and White House mid-afternoon, our time, mid-morning, New York, Washington time, because they'd been evacuated, you remember, in the chaos of 9/11. In NATO, the key article of the NATO treaty that the Americans wrote in, Truman and Marshall and Atchison, is Article 5. An attack on one of us shall be considered an attack on all of us. That's what kept Stalin at bay and Khrushchev at bay in the Cold War. We had never invoked it. And it was my Canadian colleague, David Wright, who came to me on the afternoon of 9/11 and said, have you thought about invoking Article 5? And I said, well, it would be a great shot in the arm to the American people, but if we try for it, will the Europeans actually agree to go to war with us? He said, I think they will. We then talked to every ambassador, and by the next morning, I was able to call Condoleezza Rice, who was the National Security Advisor to the President, 4 a.m. Washington time, and I said, Condi, the Allies are ready to invoke Article 5. I need the President's permission. She said, go for it. I said, well, that's good. The Allies are ready to go to war for us. I think I need the President personally to give me that instruction. She said, go for it. She said, the President had a really bad day. He's trying to get some sleep, and this is a great shot in the arm for the United States. And we invoked Article 5 that morning. And every single one of the European countries and Canada went into Afghanistan with us. And they're still there with us today, 17 years later. The Chinese and Russians don't have alliances. They have no one willing to fight with them, back them up in tough times. We do. And so when I reflect on this relationship with Europe and NATO, it's so vital that we show that friendship and solidarity back, and that's not happening now. I have to be honest with you. I'm worried about the direction of the country, about our moral leadership, about the divisive nature of it, of calling other countries names. And we just have to be smart about how we handle these great allies. Last question. Yes, sir, all the way in the back. And the mic is coming.
Dick Siren, class of '66, even before you. First of all, thank you very much for a great talk.
Pleasure.
Second, well, we're talking about Europe. Do you think, if we take as a premise that you can't have the euro in the long term being the same currency in Northern Europe and in Southern Europe, right? That the European Union can survive that, and how does it go forward when the hard economics of that catch up with the political desirability and need going forward?
So that's a great question. I think that most economists would say that the structural flaw in the framework of the EU is that you have a currency without a fiscal union. And boy, do we see that in the Grexit, the Greek debt crisis of 2010, 11, 12, into 13, and then came back in 15. You have a currency, but no fiscal solidarity, no fiscal centrality, no hard imposed limits on the budgets of the member states. And the Europeans recognize this. Macron, who's rapidly becoming the co-leader with Merkel because she's been weakened by the results of her election. The SP, the Social Democrats, are a much stronger member of her coalition than they had been in the last national unity government. Macron wants to have an EU finance minister. That's probably too much for the market to bear in 2018. I think it's coming. And if you had to look ahead 10 years, I guess I'd say that the EU is going to have to do a couple things. You're going to have the Eurozone, then you're going to have EU members in a concentric circle around the Eurozone who will retain their own currencies. You're going to have outliers like Britain, not members of the Union, probably with a customs union relationship with the European Union. And at some point, they're going to have to make this hard constitutional change to devolve more power to Brussels on the finance and economic and budgetary side, and have a fiscal union to go along with the currency. The people of Europe aren't going to like this. They're trying to, it's like the United States, they're trying to pull power away from Brussels back into their national parliaments. But the only fix seems to be the creation of a fiscal union over the next decade or so. It's going to be a difficult problem for the Europeans to get their arms around. German leadership critical, but matching it with French leadership, and you're beginning to see that with Macron, that's also essential for the Europeans. Figuring out their relationship with the United States post-Donald Trump. I think any Republican who succeeds Trump or any Democrat would bring us back into a closer alliance relationship with the EU and NATO than we've had. That'll be good for Europe. But the big problem with the Europeans is they have the largest global economy, actually. Largest economy in the world is the EU economy, larger than ours. They are losing the demographic battle. They're not competing with us and the Chinese in the big competitions, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, space-based military competition. The Europeans falling far behind. The trend lines don't look good for them. The way the Europeans survive from a national security standpoint is in association with the US and Canada in NATO. And that's what makes this union with Europe, this NATO link, so important for us and for them. So again, the United States is for the Europeans the lodestar. It's the saving grace on a national security perspective. So we've got a lot to do as a country. I'd say my belief is that we're going to emerge from our present crises okay. We'll surmount them. We're a strong country, and I think if we remember what made us great in the past 73 years, we should be in good shape in the future. I want to thank Andy and BC for inviting me. I wish you luck for the rest of the day in this finance conference. It's a real honor to be here as a BC graduate. Good luck to everyone. Thank you.